What is the difference between factory functions and constructor functions? When should you use which one? And also, what about classes? In the last 2 videos, I showed you factories and constructors. They're obviously very similar. If you haven't seen those 2 videos, here they are. I suggest you watch them first. But I still get a ton of comments on YouTube and TikTok. That's right, I'm on TikTok, where people are confused about, when to use which one. So it's obvious that the differences are not clear enough yet. So I wanted to make a quick follow-up video and settle this for good. Good news, this will be a code-heavy episode. Less talky and more doey. All right, this is 10 things JavaScript developers should know but probably don't. This is episode 5, factory versus constructor. Let's go. To recap, this is a factory function, right? It creates an object and returns it. You can call it like any other normal function, pass in your parameters, and you get back an object with properties and functions, which we call methods because they belong to the object. In contrast, this is a constructor function. By convention, it starts with a capital letter and you call it with the new keyword, just like that. This is called an object instantiation. Behind the scenes, the function is creating an object for you called this, then whatever code you write that manipulates the this object, and then it returns the this back to you where your variable assignment was. And of course, those parts are happening under the hood. So you and I don't have to write those, but that is effectively how it works. Okay, so here they are side by side, right? So the general purpose of both is to write your object creation logic once and use either function to create multiple objects with any dynamic information they have passed in as parameters. So that's the similarities. Let's talk about the differences, right? As always, we're gonna be using those 2 objects, the me object and the you object, with the name property and the talk function that announces the name. First, we'll do that with the factory and discuss a couple of things, and then we'll do the exact same thing with the constructor, right? To the browser. All right, let's write our factory function again. So that was function create person. You pass in a name. Then I will return an object. I will send you back the name, which is short for name. And the talk, which is just a function that returns. What am I returning? I'm returning. Let's just return I am name, right? Great. So by the way, this name is the same thing as this name. Let me see if I can use this feature. Oh yeah. All right, so this name is this name, and we are assigning the name property of the object that we're returning to the value that we're passing in. You should be familiar with this stuff. There's a shorthand here where we can just get rid of this if both of them have the same name. Oh, too many names. And that's what it does. So I'll do that, then I'll create my me object. Const me equals, I'm gonna call the function now, create person. So now it shows up because now the browser knows that guy exists. I'm gonna pass in my name. And I'm also gonna create a you object with the name Poli, right? Excellent. So let's look at our objects. Let's look at me first of all. For me, all right, it has a name. Shout out George Hahn for me. The name property obviously shows up and the talk function also shows up. Very simple stuff. You has the exact same thing. I've repeated this so many times during this series. I hope you're not sick of it. Me.talk. Fantastic. And then you.talk. So let's take a look at these 2 objects, right? I want you to remember where the talk function is. It's actually sitting right next to name with this like brighter color. It's the same color as name. So remember this is gonna come in handy. This is gonna be important. So why does this matter? You'll see in a second. This is actually very important stuff. So what if I modify the me.talk, right? So let's say I wanted to change the logic. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say me.talk equals some other function, some new function. just for fun, let's see what happens. Let's say we realize we're being rude, right? We're not really, we're announcing ourselves, but we're not saying hello. So what if I want to say hello, then say I am this name? Let's see what happens then. So if I do that, okay, what does me.talk do? It added the hello, right? That's pretty simple. What about you.talk? That didn't change, right? So why does this matter? Well, this tells me three things. This says, first of all, me.talk and you.talk are not the same function in memory, meaning the code we wrote is actually two different pieces. Each object gets its own copy of the function. This means when I created the object, right, the factory function, which I deleted, which I can bring back, this factory function, right, when it creates this object and returns it, it actually creates these, literally these letters that I wrote. It's going to copy these and attaches them to every object. So to the me object and the you object. They're like identical twins, this me and you, but they're still different people. Right? So we have a copy of this function. The second thing that means is that we're occupying more space in memory. Let's go back up. This means if I'm actually copying this function when I create the object, it's not a big deal if I have only two objects, a me and a you, and I have just one function that's being copied, and that one function only has one line. What's the big deal, right? You're right, it's not a huge deal, right? But it is a copy. And then finally, the third thing that this means is that if we need to modify the logic, which I just did, this reusable, so to speak, talk function, right? It's not really, I can't change it. If I want to change it, I have to change it on all of the instances of all of these objects, me and you and whatever other object I have. I've kind of talked about this in the series already. So what's the big deal here, right? We're not really using an inheritance hierarchy, is my point, right? We should be clear about that. So even though we're reusing the function, because it's not using inheritance, that's a different model behind your logic here. So you should just be aware of that, because even if that's what you want, it's important to distinguish between what a factory is doing and what a constructor is doing. So it's not necessarily a bad thing what I'm calling out here, and there is a way around it, which I'll show you in a second. There's actually two ways. But again, just be aware of what's happening under the hood, right? Just a quick note on how to fix this. There are two ways to fix it. There is a really terrible way to fix it. It's a horrible idea. Never do this, but I'll show you anyway, just to prove a point. Me and you, if we take another look, if we look at the prototype, we are of type object, which means they're essentially instances of the object class, if you were using a class metaphor. So you can add a function to any prototype. If my prototype of the me object is object, I can say object.prototype. I covered this in the inheritance chain video, but if I triple check this versus me.proto, they're the same thing. So that means if I say object.prototype dot, let's say dot speak, or yeah, let's just use speak, equals a function, and it does, what does it do? It just returns, oh, hello, right? Nothing too fancy. It just does that. That means me is going to have, on its proto, is going to have a speak. This also means you is going to have a speak. I'm just going to call it u.speak, right? But the problem is every object in your application now has the speak function on it. Bad idea. Every object, even if I don't, let's create another one. Const a equals a brand new object with nothing on it, right? If I do that, a.speak actually exists, and that's a bad thing. Never do this. But a better way to do this, actually, before I even go there, window.speak spiel also exists. I mean, this just shows up on everything that's an object in your application. So don't do that. But a better way to do it, this is a much better idea, and actually solves the original problem of inheritance too, is using an object like this. So instead of returning the object, I'm going to refresh so we'll have to do this again. Instead of returning the object in our function, create person name, instead of returning a brand new object just like that, I can use object.create, which is a function that I covered a couple of videos ago. If you create an object like this, then you get a chance to pass it a prototype. You can say, I want your prototype to be something other than object. So let's take a look at that. First, actually, before I do this, I'm gonna create the proto itself. So if I have a const proto, or let's say my cool proto, so we don't confuse it with the existing proto. If this is just an object with a talk function on it, and it returns hello, I am this.name. We'll get to why this works here. So if I have a just an object with a talk function on it, I can use this object as the prototype of any other object that I may create. So then I can have my create person function, factory function, and what it will do, it will return, instead of an empty object, it will return object.create. Object.create takes first a prototype, and then let's see, I want it to be my prototype, my cool prototype, my cool proto, and then I can, we're getting into the API of the create object.create, but you can basically define any property that you want, and you can set its value. So it gets a little more complicated syntactically, but this is basically everything that I was doing before, except using object.create. I think that's all I need. So let's do const me equals, same thing as before, create person. Let's pass it the name. Okay, oh, name Sina, I mean. Let's look at, whoa, what happened? What did I miss? What did I miss? Oh, of course, my create person doesn't take the person argument. So let's copy this one more time. I'm gonna refresh. We'll do it again. We'll do it live. So we'll do that, and then I have to accept a name, and then I'm using this name down here to set the value of the name property that I'm attaching to my new object that I'm creating. Person, great. Const me equals, what was it? Yep, create new person. Now let's take a look at the me object. I have a name. I don't see a talk directly on the object itself, but if I look at my proto, now it shows up all bright and shiny and beautiful. So this means anyone who is created using create person function, me.talk, is going to have access to that function, which is amazing. So it actually solves our problem, right? The talk function has been moved to the prototype. Brilliant. And just to prove that that now we're using the same function, I can say me.proto.talk. There. So it's sitting on my prototype. Okay, so let's move on from, actually we can move on from factories altogether. So I want to do the exact same thing with a constructor, but first a water break. Ah, delicious. Okay, so let's take a look at constructors. Back to the browser. Dun 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 dun. Dev tools. Do you know what song that is? Okay, so let's create our constructor. Function person takes a name. This is from episode 4, so the previous video. If you haven't seen that, please watch that first. We will take a name and we'll assign this name to name. Cool. Const ben equals new person, and this is Benno. Okay, Let's see, Ben is an instance of person. So its prototype is of type person. This person thing does not show up, by the way, for the other objects that we created, right? It just says, it says nothing actually here. So why does that matter, right? The fact that Ben is an instance of this new type we created called person, it means that it already comes with its own prototype. It means that Ben is now inheriting from person. And that means you can add things. For example, I can write person.prototype. So person becomes this new type because it's a constructor function and it gets its own prototype. So I can say ben.prototype.talk equals new function. And then I can return, hello, I am this.name. Right? So now ben.talk does what we expect it to do. It gives us the right message. And if you don't understand how Ben is able to find the talk function, even though it doesn't exist directly on the object itself, if you don't know how it's able to find it, you should watch the video I made on the prototype chain and JavaScript prototypal inheritance chain. I explained that whole thing there. And if I create another object, of course, const sam equals new person, oops, and with the name Sam, Sam.talk also, of course, gives us the right message, right? Without me having to write or copy a function, it already exists because it's on its prototype. Again, when I try to reach that method on it, the fact that it doesn't exist directly on it doesn't mean that it's just going to give up. It's going to look further into the prototype chain and eventually it's going to find it and do what it needs to do. So now let's modify the person.prototype. Person.prototype.talk. If I change this to, let's say I want to be a little fancier. Let's say the logic was incorrect. I can say return, let's ciao, I don't know. Ciao, io sono. I know a little bit Italian. Let's say we want it to be cooler. We want it to be Italian. This.name. So if I do this, right now, check this out. Ben.talk. Ben is now Italian, and so is Sam. Sam.talk. He's also, it's changed, right? So now we are inheriting. Now this is something that doesn't happen with factories by default unless we use our workaround, which again, I should mention, it was totally fine, but by default, factory functions don't give us this capability. Whereas here now we're truly doing inheritance. We're doing inheritance right. Am I doing it right, Mime? So assuming we do use our prototype workaround for factories, both methods really give us the same end result, to be completely honest with you. So why would you use factories if you can have this prototype thing and you don't have to have a workaround with constructors? Well, for one thing, factories are simpler. I mean, yes, we had to write a little bit of a workaround with the prototype, but they're simpler. It's just a function, right? A factory is just a function. We don't have to get the new keyword involved. There's no this. It's a little simpler, and you don't have to manipulate anything new. You just return an object, right? That's to me, that's a lot simpler. Factories are a little more flexible, in my opinion. You're really truly using the power of closures in a factory, which also means you're achieving something that we call data privacy. We haven't really covered that, so I'm going to show you a quick example of it. If I have a function, the same exact function, create person, right, and I pass in name, I don't have to return name as part of this object. I was just assuming that was what we wanted. But if we don't return it, and if I just do the talk function and do exactly what we've done, hopefully last time for today, what do I want? Oh yeah. What if I want name, right? What if I just drag this guy that gets passed in directly, put it in my return statement here, right? What if I do that? Then I do const me equals create person. So check this out. Great, me.talk works. Fantastic. Me.name is undefined. So it's hidden from me. So I can't even reach it. It's not on my proto or anything. It's because I didn't return it in that object, right? So this is what we call data privacy. You don't necessarily get that right away with a constructor or a class. But with factories, it's a lot more natural to want to hide this stuff. So why is this valuable? It's because if you can't even access it, you're not going to create some kind of bug randomly, accidentally by overwriting that value. This is how a lot of nasty bugs, this is where they come from. So this is nice. With our example of a constructor or a class, that's going to take a lot more work. So now what about classes, right? All this talk, I actually got a couple of comments, people asking about classes. Well, some of us were very excited when classes first came to JavaScript because we thought this is going to be a new paradigm. Some of us come from JavaScript or ActionScript, where object orientation was a big deal. There are a lot of Java folks now writing JavaScript. And so it was interesting to see classes come to JavaScript. And some of us thought, oh, we can just do away with the whole prototype thing. But I'm going to simplify your life for you a little bit and tell you that classes, which you probably know only exist as of ES6, and you may not be able to use ES6 everywhere, but let's say you can, those are essentially constructors. It's just an easier way of writing constructors, so you don't have to write the prototype and things like that. But it uses the same crazy prototype stuff, chain, inheritance, all those words I'm just going to blurb out. It's all the same stuff, even for classes, under the hood, as we say, right? So classes do use constructors. So everything I mentioned today about constructors pretty much applies to classes almost exactly the same way. So if you want to use classes instead of constructors, be my guest. But know what you're doing. When people ask me why I bother even making videos about such fundamental stuff in JavaScript, and oh, I have classes now, I don't have to worry about this stuff, and I don't need to write prototype. Wrong. The essence of JavaScript is still the stuff that I showed you today. So that hasn't changed. And I think it's really important for you and me and everybody else to know this stuff. And then you can go ahead and decide if you wanted to use classes or not. There's no real right or wrong way to do any of this, really. In JavaScript, there are a lot of different ways to do this. And now you know what I personally prefer. A shout out to the great Eric Elliott, who wrote, in JavaScript, any function can return a new object. When it's not a constructor function or a class, it's a factory function. He covered this topic and a lot of other great JavaScript fundamentals on his Medium blog. If you've ever searched for anything JavaScript on Medium, chances are you've read some of his stuff. He's great. If you're not a fan of his already, go check him out. He rocks. So I just wanted to point out these small but important differences between factories and constructors because they can be confusing. It might take a couple of times for you to really understand what I'm saying, and you may have to go back and watch this video or even this whole series, but it's worth it. All right, I thought this was going to be a short video, but I couldn't help myself. I hope it was helpful. Send me your questions here in the comments below, or find me on TikTok. And thanks for supporting the channel and subscribing and sharing. Me love you very much for a very long time. At the time I'm recording this video, we're about to hit 5,000 subscribers, which is nuts. This video was mostly inspired by a comment by a friend of mine, Chris Brown, cool name, from when I used to live in Australia. We used to work on the same software about 15 years ago. Time flies when you're learning JavaScript basics. Hope you're doing well, Chris. Thank you for the inspiration. Next episode, I promise I'm going to dedicate to this keyword. Very important topic. This has been episode 5 of 10 things JavaScript developers should know, but probably don't. I'll see you on TikTok.